welcome to this session. Discussions on AI often focus on algorithms, they often focus on computing power, or even the latest technological breakthroughs. And those discussions are very, very important. However, they sometimes overlook a fundamental question, which is what digital foundations are required for artificial intelligence to work effectively, to work equitably, and responsibly. My name is Bonaventure Saturday, and I'm delighted to share with you insights in today's session on how digital public infrastructure can shape the future of artificial intelligence in Africa. But before we dive in, allow me to briefly introduce myself. I am currently the research manager at Pollicy Data Institute, and I am based here in Uganda, where I contribute to the research on digital governance, research on digital public infrastructure, artificial intelligence, Afrofeminist digital governance, and inclusive digital transformation across Africa. And my work mainly focuses on understanding how these digital technologies can influence governance, how they can influence public participation and service delivery, particularly within this evolving digital ecosystem. So much of my recent work was examining, how digital public infrastructure is connected with digital governance, issues to do with public trust, or even responsible AI. But before we begin, let's outline some of the things, some of the takeaways that I hope you will benefit from this session. Number one, we will examine how artificial intelligence connects with digital public infrastructure and public trust. Secondly, I will demonstrate how governance, how technical and institutional factors, influence responsible AI adoption, using some of the cases from Uganda, some of the case studies from Kenya and South Africa. Then thirdly, we will also examine both the opportunities. We shall also look at the barriers associated with AI-enabled public services. Then we shall also conclude with practical recommendations for governments, for technology leaders, for public institutions, for civil society organizations, and also recommendations for development partners. So I hope that this discussion will, demonstrate why African experiences within digital public infrastructure have relevance beyond the African continent itself, and how these discussions can contribute meaningfully to global conversations on responsible AI governance. But before discussing the case studies that I mentioned, it's really, really important to understand the kind of relationship between these three main pillars, three main concepts of artificial intelligence, of digital public infrastructure, of public trust. So firstly, we have to know that globally around the world, most governments are really integrating AI within their public services. So it is now being used in various sectors, in various areas like health, like immigration, like taxation, areas like education, agriculture, all these areas, all these sectors within the government are really integrating AI within their systems. However, we have to know that AI does not operate independently. We have to know that it depends on, for instance, digital public infrastructure. And when I said digital public infrastructure, what I'm talking about is the digital identity systems, the digital payment systems, the data exchange platforms, or even the public service platforms themselves. So usually what happens is that these systems generate quite enormous data. They establish identity of the citizens, they enable interoperability, and also create some kind of institutional environment within which artificial intelligence operates, within which AI functions. So Public trust, which forms the third pillar, is also quite important in that if the citizens are not trusting, the AI-enabled public infrastructures, public digital systems, if the citizens lack confidence in how their data is being collected, how their data is being shared, how their data is being governed, if they lack confidence in that, AI will then struggle to deliver its public value if they're operating within this kind of fragmented ecosystem where there is also poor interoperability, where there is weak governance, where there is limited accountability. So a strong digital public infrastructure enables effective AI. What I mean is that, for instance, effective artificial intelligence will strengthen public services. Now, trust will encourage citizens to use those services. So that means if there is an increased use, it will improve the quality of data and to improve the delivery of services. So in this way, we have to know that responsible AI, therefore, will depend on digital public infrastructure that is inclusive. It will depend on digital public infrastructure that is interoperable. It is transparent, all governed in the interest of the public. So it is really, really important to keep that in mind as we are developing, we are ensuring that AI is responsible. We are deploying it responsibly. I want us now to look at the three national experiences from the research that we conducted here at Pollicy around these digital infrastructures, these digital systems across Uganda, Kenya, and South Africa. But we have to keep in mind that although Uganda, although Kenya and South Africa differ politically, they differ economically, they differ, institutionally, but yet they still provide variable insights, comparable insights. And to begin with Uganda, for instance, a lot of investment has been made in the digital public infrastructure. When you look at the NIRA, or the National Identification and Registration Authority, when you look at the UG Hub, which is the data exchange platforms, these initiatives have come on board to support passport services, for example, to support tax administration, or even social protection. But from our findings, respondents were mentioning that, there are sometimes periods of internet shutdowns which limit access to these services, and they're also concerned about surveillance. And, this demonstrates that technological capability alone is not sufficient, since there is no access, since, the trust of the public, of the citizens, is limited within this system. And when trust in this digital system declines, definitely the confidence in the AI-enabled services will also decline. And when we look at Kenya, for example, it also presents a different lesson. It's one of the countries that are developed when it comes to digital finance or electronic payment systems. Looking at one of the system like M-Pesa, it demonstrates how a digital infrastructure can transform our everyday life. However, from our findings, there are debates around, the Huduma number, the Maisha number, illustrating that digital identity systems require legitimacy. They require transparency. They require inclusion. From our findings, which reveals that excluding, particular historically underrepresented communities, or if you create uncertainty regarding personal data, ultimately the confidence of the public, and the risks of introducing bias coming into the AI systems, which depend upon the identity in the first place, the administrative data that is being collected in the second place. So that is something very, very important to always keep in mind. And when we look at South Africa, it also offers, another good perspective. South Africa is one of the countries that are developed when it comes to initiatives like the Smart ID. They have initiatives like Mainzazi, which demonstrates great progress actually towards integrated public services. However, from our research, it demonstrates, the importance of designing digital systems for diverse populations, rather than an assumed average user who is already digital literate, who is already having access to some kind of, digital devices. So it's important to also consider the diverse users, from all the different contexts and brought on board. So what we found out from this case is that accessibility, language diversity, disability inclusion itself, it is very, very, very important, and the varying levels of literacy, they all influence whether AI systems can operate fairly. So, collectively looking at all these three countries, it demonstrates that responsible AI depends upon trusted governance. It depends upon inclusive design. It depends upon institutions which are capable of protecting the rights of the users, and while still supporting innovation. So from these three case studies from the study that we did, we also had some key barriers which we categorized in three categories. That's the governance, technical, and institutional barriers. So first concerns were around governance, weak governance, issues to do with limited privacy protections, concerns around surveillance, insufficient transparency, which all reduces the public confidence in these AI-enabled services. So that is very, very important. Those are some of the barriers that all the stakeholders need to put into consideration. Then secondly, there were concerns around technical barriers. AI itself depends on systems which are interoperable, depends on reliable, for instance, reliable digital identity, depends on accurate data, connectivity which is affordable, and access itself to these digital platforms. So where these foundations are fragmented, AI will never inevitably be constrained. The performance of AI is constrained when these foundations are fragmented. And the third category of barriers that we identified from this study were around institutional barriers. When it comes to technical capacity, we realize that many public infrastructure institutions are experiencing limited technical capacity. There is some kind of fragmented coordination. There's some kind of weak enforcement of the laws, of the regulatory frameworks. So that brings in some kind of insufficient oversight. And these challenges, of course, reduce the government's ability to deploy artificial intelligence responsibly within these digital systems that are supposed to provide services to the users, to the citizens. So importantly to note is that these barriers reinforce one another. For instance, weak governance itself will reduce the trust in the systems. Weak institutions themselves will reduce accountability. There will not be accountability will be low. To reduce accountability, and we also have to know that, for instance, weak technical infrastructure will still limit AI performance. So consequently, it's important to strengthen AI, and it requires strengthening the broader digital ecosystem. And with those barriers in mind, we had some practical recommendations that we had made and categorized according to various stakeholders, because we have to know that AI does not work alone. It requires collaboration across institutions. It requires collaboration across different stakeholders, researchers, industrial actors, civil society itself, and also the citizens themselves within this ecosystem. But mainly, when we come to government and policy makers, yes, different countries are currently working on their AI and emerging technology legal frameworks, which is a very good sign that this conversation is starting to take shape. But it's very, very important that as government do that, they should develop, right-based AI and digital public infrastructure strategies. These strategies should prioritize transparency, prioritizing accountability, prioritizing interoperability. And when we look at public institutions themselves, which implement some of these digital systems, there is great need for strengthening institutional capability, improving the data quality, conducting assessments. Institutions could conduct, the digital rights or human rights and algorithmic impact assessments, and should establish, effective mechanism for public oversight, and how this can be redressed if there are issues that are arising from these assessments that are being done. So that is very, very important for the public institutions that are in charge of providing public, ensuring that the digital services benefit the users. Then also the other category of people is called the technology developers, who are sometimes in the private sector. So it's always important also bring them into this conversation. How do you develop technology or digital systems that is designed with an approach of privacy by design, inclusion by design principles? How do we design with the users, not for the users? From the earliest stages of developing this system, not bringing the users at the very end when the system is ready and you want them to adopt it. So right from the start, right from co-creation, right from development, right from deployment and governing this whole ecosystem, this whole digital services, digital systems, it's very, very, very important to bring on board the users, right? Incorporating in these frameworks for privacy and inclusion right from the start. So that is also one of the key um, actions that we identified. Then also thirdly, when it comes to civil society organizations, when it comes to other actors like the academic institutions, it was also something important. They should always, continue generating independent evidence, doing more research around these areas, and also monitoring how AI is being implemented so that they can, facilitate meaningful public participation. And I know there are quite a number of civil society organizations out there and academic institutions that are doing a great job on this, and I implore them to keep it up and also continuing doing the great work they are doing. Then also when we look at the development partners, our funders, the regional or organizations, it's also important to also bring them on board into this conversation where we encourage them to invest in African-led innovation, invest in strengthening cross-border collaboration, supporting locally relevant governance framework. It's very, very important. Instead of importing external models and bringing them into to be adopted by the users, because some of the research that we have done points that these digital systems, some of them are usually developed from externally outside the continent and brought on board to be adopted by the users in Africa. So it's very important to invest in African-led innovation, where the lived experiences of these users, the lived experiences for the women, the girls, the other underrepresented groups are also put into consideration. So again, as I mentioned, designing with the user, not for the user, and including, being inclusive is something very, very, very important. Since, building trustworthy AI is not the responsibility of just the government alone. It's the responsibility of all stakeholders, the tech developers, the private sector, academia, the civil society, development actors and partners, and all these region bodies should all come together. It requires this whole kind of collaboration with this ecosystem. So those are the priority actions that we identified. Then before I conclude, I wanted to address two key questions which were provided by the conference organizers. One is asking what key lessons from digital public infrastructure initiatives in Africa can help build inclusive, transparent and accountable AI. And from the evidence that we have, suggests around 5 key lessons. One is investing in inclusive digital foundations. As I mentioned, before you scale up the AI driven system, it's important to have inclusivity right from the start. The digital foundations have to be inclusive so that the AI is addressing the lived realities of the users. Number two, the evidence also suggests strengthening data governance, strengthening interoperability. So data governance was one of the key um, themes that came up from our research. How is data being collected with these AI-driven systems? How is it being controlled? Who's having access to it? How is it being shared? How is it being deleted itself? So data governance is one of the key areas that need to be strengthened, and also the systems should speak to each other, because one of the key challenges was around fragmented systems, whereby almost each institution, almost each government, each country has its own kind of system. So standardizing that so that they can speak to each other and we have a seamless flow of data within these systems is very, very important. Number three, human rights, digital rights, embedding them into the design, the early stage of design of these AI systems is very, very important to improve the trust of the users. Right from the start, do the users have the right to access their data? Do the users have the right to be forgotten? Is consent meaningful, or is it just quid pro quo, just consent for use of this platform? So, embedding human rights, something very, very important to strengthen DPI initiatives to ensure that the users can be able to trust these AI systems and AI is applied responsibly. Then investing in institutional capacity, as I mentioned earlier, the technical capacity, operational capacity, allocating resources for these institutions is very, very important to build this inclusive, transparent, and accountable AI. Much as some institutions might have all these frameworks in place, enforcement could be a challenge. It sees a challenge. So it's important to invest in the capacity of the institutions so that they can implement these systems well. Then also, finally, designing AI for diverse users, as we have seen. It's very, very important. Keeping in mind, for example, people with disabilities, keeping in mind that there are people with different digital literacy levels, even the literacy levels itself, economic backgrounds, different religions, different political environments within which these countries are. So when you're designing AI for these users, it's also important to contextualize it. There's not, a one should fit all a kind of approach. Each sector needs, to be approached differently within the context in which it is applying. Then number two, the second question was asking how policymakers, how leaders, how public institutions can balance innovation, with human rights, with trust, with equitable, access. And the answer here, of course, lies in one, adopting rights-based AI governance. It is something very important, as I mentioned earlier, and also conducting human rights or digital rights assessments and assessments around the impact of the algorithm, because we have seen different algorithms having different impacts. So periodically, it's important to always, all these leaders to always have some kind of assessments, impact assessments, to track and monitor progress. How is it doing at this stage, at the end, midterm, conduct baseline survey, so that continuously, if all this is documented, we can see continuously how improvement is ongoing and know how to better these systems. Then it's also important to establish oversight that is kind of independent. We have seen some countries coming up with committees that are in charge of continuously evaluating the progress of these systems to ensure that these organizations, these public sector organizations and systems, improving the systems are kept in check so that innovation is balanced, human rights is incorporated, the citizens are trusting these systems and access is equitable. So it's very important for all these kind of actors to create an oversight body that is independent, which is very, very important to avoid, all these issues that come with non-independent bodies. And of course, as I mentioned earlier with the impact assessments, it's important to continuously evaluate. AI systems, as we bring them on board, many issues always come along the way as we are implementing. Many barriers that I mentioned earlier when it comes to governance, technical, and institution. So continuously, it's very, very important to always evaluate these AI systems and you evaluate them for fairness, the fair and the keeping on the fairness principle, evaluating them on accountability. Is these systems accountable? Are they ensuring accountability? So continuously documenting, evaluating, and doing these assessments on fairness for these AI systems, accountability for these AI systems is very, very, very important in ensuring that there's a balance between innovation, with human rights and with equitable access. So basically, those are the answers that we had for those two key questions that were provided by the events organizers. And I would like to leave you with one thought, one final thought. You have to keep in mind that artificial intelligence will, undoubtedly transform public services in Africa, and building AI that is trustworthy. It's a shared responsibility across different actors, you and me. Everyone should be brought on board and included into this discussion because we have to know that AI alone cannot compensate for the weak governance. I mean, AI alone cannot compensate for fragmented institutions, for instance. AI alone can not compensate for inadequate digital public infrastructure. So if Africa is to succeed in building digital public infrastructure that is trusted, DPI that is inclusive, that is interoperable, that is respecting the rights of the users, it will strengthen the public service delivery across the continent, but also it will also offer valuable lessons for responsible AI governance worldwide. So the lessons we are having across Africa can be shared worldwide, across even the global south can draw some of the lessons that we have been sharing from the the global north. We also get some insights that will be shared from the global south. So this is something very important, and I'm looking forward to continuing this conversation. And I really thank you very much for your time, for getting some time to talk to us. And I wish you the very best. And for more information, please always check us out, policy.org, our website, all on Twitter, all X, policy.org, then Instagram, and all these platforms. Thank you very much. It has been fun. Bye bye.